The bakery smelled like vanilla and broken promises when Amara Johnson whispered the words that shattered her heart. I need to cancel the order. Her son's birthday cake sat behind the counter. Blue frosting swirled like galaxies. Everything 7-year-old Caleb had dreamed about. He stood beside her, trying so hard to be brave, his lip trembling as she signed the cancellation form. The other customers looked away, uncomfortable witnesses to a mother's quiet devastation. But Richard Hale, a billionaire 2 people behind them, didn't look away. What he didn't know was that his simple act of kindness would lead them into something far more dangerous than poverty, and that sometimes a child's innocent observation can destroy an empire. Today, they were all about to learn that some battles are worth fighting, no matter the cost. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The rain came down in sheets that Tuesday morning, turning the sidewalks into mirrors that reflected the gray sky above. Amara Johnson pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders as she hurried down Maple Street, her grocery store apron still visible beneath the worn fabric. Her shift had ended 20 minutes ago, but she'd stayed late to help restock the dairy section because her manager had asked nicely, and Amara had never been good at saying no when people needed help. Beside her, 7-year-old Caleb walked with careful steps, trying to avoid the puddles, even though his sneakers were already soaked through. His small hand gripped hers tightly, and every few seconds he'd glance up at his mother with those bright, hopeful eyes that made Amara's heart feel too big for her chest. "Are we really getting it today, Mommy?" Caleb asked, his voice barely audible over the sound of rain drumming against the awning above them. Amara managed a smile, the kind she'd perfected over years of making sure her son never saw how tired she really was. "We're going to try, baby. We're going to try real hard." The bakery appeared ahead, its warm yellow lights cutting through the gloom like a promise. Sweet dreams. Bakery had been in this neighborhood for 30 years, and Amara had passed it countless times on her way to and from work, always glancing at the window displays but rarely going inside. Today was different. Today was Caleb's birthday, and she'd been saving for 3 weeks to afford the one thing he'd asked for when she told him they couldn't have a party this year. "Just a cake, Mommy," he'd said, his little face so serious. "Just a cake with blue frosting. That's all I want." The bell above the door chimed as they entered, and the scent of vanilla and sugar wrapped around them like a warm blanket. The bakery was small but beautiful, with cream-colored walls decorated with framed photos of elaborate wedding cakes and smiling customers. Display cases lined one wall, filled with pastries that looked too perfect to be real. Caleb's eyes went wide immediately. He released Amara's hand and pressed his face against the glass, his breath fogging up the surface as he stared at the rows of cupcakes decorated to look like tiny galaxies, complete with edible glitter that sparkled under the lights. "Mommy, look," he whispered, pointing at a tray of star-shaped cupcakes with purple and blue frosting. "Do you think they have the blue one? The one from the picture?" Amara's phone buzzed in her pocket, but she ignored it, focusing on her son's excitement. "Let's talk to the nice lady at the counter, okay? We'll see what they have." Mrs. Robbins, the bakery owner, stood behind the register with flour dusting her apron and a kind smile that reached her eyes. She was in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and the sort of warm presence that made strangers feel like old friends. "Well, hello there," Mrs. Robbins said, her attention drawn to Caleb, who was still mesmerized by the display. "Is today someone's special day?" "It's my birthday," Caleb said shyly, finally pulling his gaze away from the cupcakes. "I'm 7 today." 7. My goodness, that's a big year. Are you here to pick out something special? Amara stepped forward, her fingers nervously twisting the strap of her purse. "I called last week about ordering a small cake." "Johnson." "Amara Johnson." Mrs. Robbins nodded, pulling out a worn ledger from beneath the counter. "Ah, yes. The 8-inch round with blue buttercream frosting. I have it ready in the back. Would you like to see it before I box it up? That would be wonderful, thank you. As Mrs. Robbins disappeared through the doorway behind the counter, Amara's phone buzzed again. This time she pulled it out, and her stomach dropped when she saw the screen. 3 text messages, all from her landlord, Mr. Patterson. She opened the most recent one, and the words seemed to blur together as her vision tunneled. Rent was due Friday. Late fee of $75 has been added to your account. Need payment by end of week, or we'll have to discuss other options. Her hands trembled as she quickly opened her banking app, praying that somehow the numbers would be different than what she remembered. The balance stared back at her in cold, unforgiving digits. 850. She'd been so careful, stretching every dollar, picking up extra hours whenever she could. But Caleb had needed new shoes last week because his toes were pressing against the front of his old ones, and the electric bill had been higher than usual because of the cold snap in early spring. The cake cost $92 with tax. She'd confirmed it twice when she placed the order, making absolutely sure she could swing it. But that was before the late fee, before the shoes, before reality had reminded her once again that no matter how hard she worked, there was never quite enough. "Mommy?" Caleb tugged on her sleeve, his expression shifting from excitement to concern. "Are you okay?" She quickly locked her phone and slipped it back into her pocket, forcing brightness into her voice. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just checking the time." Mrs. Robbins returned carrying a white bakery box, which she set carefully on the counter before opening it with practiced hands. Inside was the cake Amara had ordered, an 8-inch round covered in smooth blue buttercream, with delicate white swirls that did indeed look like a galaxy. In the center, written in silver edible ink, were the words, "Happy Birthday, Caleb," surrounded by tiny silver stars. Caleb gasped, standing on his tiptoes to see better. "Mommy, it's perfect. It's exactly what I wanted." The joy on his face was almost unbearable. Amara felt her throat tighten, felt the tears she'd been holding back all morning threaten to spill over. She'd promised him this one thing, this one simple thing that most kids got without their parents, having to choose between a birthday cake and keeping a roof over their heads. Mrs. Robbins smiled warmly. "It's a beauty, isn't it? We can add some candles if you'd like, no extra charge." Amara opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come. She stared at the cake, at her son's hopeful face, at the kind bakery owner who had no idea that she was about to break her child's heart. "Mrs. Robbins," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry, but I need to ask you something. Is there any way I could pay part of it today and bring the rest tomorrow? I just need one more day." The warmth in Mrs. Robbins' expression shifted to sympathy, then regret. "Oh, honey, I wish I could. I really do. But we have a policy about payments, especially for custom orders. The owner is very strict about it, and I've gotten in trouble before for making exceptions." Amara nodded quickly, her cheeks burning with shame. "Of course. I understand. I'm sorry I asked." Behind them, someone in line coughed uncomfortably. Amara could feel the eyes on her back, could sense the awkwardness spreading through the small space. Caleb was looking between his mother and the cake, his little mind trying to piece together what was happening. "Can we still get it, Mommy?" he asked, his voice small and uncertain now. Amara knelt down so she was eye level with her son. She brushed her thumb across his cheek, memorizing the curve of his face, the scatter of freckles across his nose, the innocent hope in his eyes that hadn't yet been fully dimmed by the harsh realities she faced every single day. "Baby, I need you to be brave for me, okay? Can you do that?" Caleb's lip trembled, but he nodded. Amara stood and turned back to Mrs. Robbins, her hands shaking as she gripped the edge of the counter. The words felt like glass in her throat. "I need to cancel the order. I'm so sorry for wasting your time." The bakery fell completely silent. Even the soft jazz playing from the speakers seemed to fade away. Mrs. Robbins' face crumpled with genuine sadness. Are you sure? Is there anything we can work out? I'm sure. Thank you for making it. It really is beautiful. One of the employees, a young woman arranging pastries in the display case, glanced away quickly, her expression uncomfortable. An elderly couple in line shifted their shopping bags from one hand to the other, suddenly very interested in the menu board on the wall. Mommy? Caleb's voice cracked. We're not getting the cake. Not today, sweetheart. But it's my birthday. I know, baby, I know. Two people behind Amara in line stood a man she hadn't really noticed when they first arrived. Richard Hale wore a soft blue cashmere sweater and dark jeans, his salt and pepper hair slightly damp from the rain. Next to him, holding his hand tightly, was his 8-year-old daughter Lily, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. They'd come in for their weekly tradition of picking out pastries together, something Richard insisted on despite his demanding schedule. It was one of the few normal things they did, something his late wife had started years ago. Richard had been checking his phone when the woman and boy entered, barely paying attention to his surroundings. But something about the exchange at the counter had drawn his focus. He watched as the mother knelt to speak to her son, watched the careful way she touched the boy's face, watched the moment her composure nearly shattered before she pulled it back together with visible effort. His frown wasn't one of judgment. It was recognition, concern, the echo of a memory he'd tried for years to bury. Lily tugged on his sleeve, her voice a whisper. Dad, why does she look like she wants to cry? Richard didn't have an answer. He just watched as the woman signed something at the counter, her signature shaky as the boy stood perfectly still beside her, trying so hard to be brave. It's okay, Mommy, Caleb said, his voice wobbling but determined. We can just get a small cupcake at home, the ones from the store. Those are good too. That was the moment something inside Richard cracked. He remembered nights when money had been tight for him and his late wife, Catherine, back before Hale Enterprises became what it was today. He remembered Catherine crying in their tiny apartment bathroom because they couldn't afford both the car payment and Lily's medication that month. He remembered the shame on her face when she had to ask her parents for help, the way she'd hated feeling weak even though she was the strongest person he'd ever known. This woman at the counter wore that same expression, pride mixed with defeat, dignity clinging by a thread. Mrs. Robbins handed Amara a cancellation form, and Amara took the pen with trembling fingers. She signed her name, then slid the paper back across the counter like she was surrendering something vital. I really am sorry, Amara said again, her voice thick with unshed tears. Don't apologize, dear, Mrs. Robbins said gently. Life happens. I hope his birthday is still wonderful. Amara nodded, unable to speak anymore. She took Caleb's hand and turned toward the door, her movements mechanical, like she was moving through water. Caleb walked beside her silently, his head down, his free hand clutching the strap of his small backpack. As they passed Richard and Lily, the little girl caught Caleb's eye. He glanced up just long enough for her to offer him a small, sympathetic smile. Then they were gone, the bell above the door chiming as they stepped back out into the rain. Richard stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing. Lily looked up at him, her blue eyes searching his face. Daddy? What's wrong? He shook his head slowly, then stepped up to the counter where Mrs. Robbins was carefully closing the rejected cake box. Excuse me. That cake. Is it still available? Mrs. Robbins looked surprised. Well, yes, but it has the boy's name on it. I'd have to remake it or discount it significantly because of the personalization. I'll take it. As is. You want a cake that says, Happy Birthday, Caleb? Yes. Richard pulled out his wallet, his movements quick and decisive. Can you keep it aside for just a moment? And please don't mention to anyone that I purchased it. Mrs. Robbins's expression softened with understanding. Of course. Richard paid quickly, then knelt down to Lily's level. Sweetheart, Do you remember how we talked about helping people when we can? Lily nodded seriously. Like how Mommy used to bring food to Mr. Peterson next door when he was sick. Exactly like that. That little boy out there, it's his birthday today. And I think he deserves to have a cake on his birthday, don't you? Is that why you bought it? Yes. Lily's face lit up with understanding and approval. That's really nice, Daddy. Mommy would have liked that. The mention of Catherine made Richard's chest tighten, but he smiled. She would have, wouldn't she? Mrs. Robbins handed him the boxed cake in a discreet shopping bag. Richard thanked her, then took Lily's hand and headed for the door. Outside, the rain had lightened to a drizzle. He scanned the street and spotted them about half a block away, walking slowly toward the bus stop. Wait here with me for just a second, Richard told Lily, and she nodded, holding tight to his coat. Richard approached carefully, not wanting to startle them. Excuse me, he called out when he was about 10 feet away. Amara turned sharply, instinctively pulling Caleb behind her. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry, her posture defensive. When she saw Richard, confusion flickered across her face. I'm sorry to bother you, Richard said, keeping his voice gentle and non-threatening. He held up the shopping bag. I was in line behind you at the bakery. I couldn't help but overhear, and I wanted to do something. I bought the cake for your son, for Caleb. Amara stared at him like he'd just spoken a foreign language. You what? It's his birthday. A birthday should feel like a birthday. For a long moment, she just looked at him, her expression cycling through shock, gratitude, suspicion, and finally settling on something harder. I can't accept that. It's just a cake. It's not just a cake. Her voice was firm now, the vulnerability from the bakery replaced by a protective wall. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I can't take it. Richard felt Lily move closer to his side, watching the exchange with wide eyes. I understand your pride, and I respect it, but your son shouldn't have to go without on his birthday because of circumstances beyond his control. That's exactly why I can't accept it, Amara said, her eyes blazing now. Because then what's the lesson? That when things get hard, some stranger will swoop in and fix it? That's not the world we live in, and I won't teach my son to expect that. The words hit Richard harder than he expected. She was right in a way. But he couldn't shake the image of the boy's face in the bakery, the way he'd tried so hard to be brave for his mother. You're teaching him to be strong, Richard said quietly. Anyone can see that. But accepting help, when it's offered, doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Amara's jaw tightened. She glanced down at Caleb, who was peeking around her leg at Richard and Lily. The longing on the boy's face was almost painful to witness. Thank you for the gesture, Amara said finally, her voice softer but still resolute. But we'll be okay. We always are. Richard didn't push. Instead, he did something unexpected. He knelt down so he was at Caleb's eye level, just as Amara had done in the bakery. The little boy watched him with curious, cautious eyes. Hey, buddy, Richard said gently. Happy birthday. I hope today still becomes a great day for you. Caleb's face broke into a shy smile despite everything, and Richard watched as Amara's expression crumbled just a fraction. She quickly pulled herself together, but not before Richard saw the depth of pain there. Say thank you, Amara told Caleb quietly. Thank you, Caleb whispered. Lily, unable to help herself, waved at Caleb from beside her father. Happy birthday, I'm 8. How old are you? 7, Caleb said, his smile growing just a bit. Amara gently turned Caleb back toward the bus stop. Come on, baby, we need to go. Richard stood, watching them walk away. Lily looked up at him, confused. Daddy, she didn't take the cake. No, she didn't. Why not? Because sometimes people need to keep their dignity more than they need help, and we have to respect that. What do we do with the cake now? Richard looked down at his daughter, then back at the woman and boy disappearing down the street. Something in his chest ached. A feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. It was more than sympathy. It was a profound sense of helplessness mixed with determination. "We'll figure it out," he said quietly. As Amara and Caleb reached the bus shelter, Caleb looked back one more time. Richard lifted his hand in a small wave. The boy waved back before his mother gently turned him around again. Lily watched them until they were out of sight. "I think she's really sad, Daddy." "I think you're right, sweetheart." "Do you think they'll be okay?" Richard thought about the woman's fierce eyes, the protective way she held her son, the strength it must have taken to walk away from something her child wanted so desperately. "I think she's one of the strongest people I've met, but I hope they will be." They walked back to Richard's car in silence. As he secured Lily in her booster seat, she asked, "Can we bring the cake home?" "Of course. Maybe we can share it. We could take a picture and send it to them somehow, so Caleb knows someone was thinking about him on his birthday." Richard's heart swelled with love for his compassionate daughter. "That's a beautiful idea, Lily." But even as he said it, he knew it wouldn't be enough. The image of that little boy's face, the sound of his mother's voice breaking as she canceled the order. It had lodged itself somewhere deep in Richard's mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that somehow their lives had just become entangled in a way he couldn't yet understand. Hours later, Richard sat in his office at Hale Enterprises, staring at reports he couldn't focus on. His assistant had just delivered news that Dean Harper, his biggest competitor, had outbid them on the Riverside Development Project. It was a significant loss, one that would send his board into a panic by tomorrow morning. But Richard found he didn't care as much as he should have. His mind kept drifting back to the bakery, to the woman named Amara, to her son Caleb, who'd whispered, "It's okay, Mommy," with tears in his eyes. His phone buzzed with another urgent email about the Harper situation, but he ignored it. Instead, he thought about Catherine, about how she would have handled seeing that scene in the bakery. She would have done exactly what he did, he knew. She would have wanted to do more. Across town, Amara started her second shift of the day at Prestige Office Cleaning Services. The building was mostly empty at this hour, just security guards and a few workaholics burning the midnight oil. She pushed her cleaning cart through the marble hallways, her movements automatic after 3 years of doing this same route 5 nights a week. Her supervisor, Mr. Ellis, found her in the executive break room. He was a gruff man in his 50s, but he'd always been fair with Amara. "Johnson, you okay? You look like you've been crying." "I'm fine, Mr. Ellis, just allergies." He studied her for a moment, then sighed. "Take your break early tonight, 15 minutes instead of 10. And there's some leftover pizza in the staff room if you want it." Amara's eyes welled up at the small kindness. "Thank you. We take care of our people here. You're one of the good ones." During her break, Amara sat in the empty stairwell where she always took her few moments of solitude. She pulled out her phone and looked at the photo she'd taken of Caleb that morning, before everything had fallen apart. He was grinning, gap-toothed and excited, holding up 7 fingers. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from Talia, her younger sister. She didn't call back. Talia would either want money or want to complain about her latest boyfriend, or want to tell Amara she was being too strict with Caleb. None of those conversations would make this day any better. Instead, Amara reached into her bag and pulled out a piece of paper, slightly crumpled from being carried around all day. It was a drawing Caleb had made last week, a picture of a blue cake with yellow candles. Above it, in his careful 7-year-old handwriting, were the words, "My birthday wish." She traced the crayon lines with her finger, and finally, alone in that concrete stairwell, she let herself cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quiet tears that rolled down her cheeks and dripped onto her work shirt. She cried for her sweet boy who deserved so much more than she could give him. She cried for the shame of standing in that bakery and having to say those words out loud. She cried for the exhaustion that lived in her bones, for the constant fear that she was one emergency away from losing everything. But most of all, she cried because that man, that stranger with kind eyes and an expensive sweater, had seen her at her lowest moment. had witnessed her failure as a mother. And somehow that hurt worse than anything else. She didn't know his name. Didn't know anything about him except that he'd tried to help, and she'd been too proud, too afraid, too damaged by years of barely surviving to accept it. She wiped her eyes, took a deep breath, and stood up. Her break was over. There were 6 more offices to clean before she could go home to her son, who was staying with Mrs. Chen in apartment 3B because Talia had never shown up like she'd promised. As Amara pushed her cart down another empty hallway, she had no idea that the man from the bakery was sitting in his office 7 floors above her head. No idea that in a few short hours their worlds would collide again in a way that would change everything. All she knew was that tomorrow, she would wake up and do it all over again. Because that's what mothers did. They kept going, kept fighting, kept surviving even when their hearts were breaking. For Caleb, she would always keep going. The rain had stopped outside, but the streets were still wet, reflecting the city lights like scattered diamonds. In his small apartment bed, Caleb lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about blue frosting and kind strangers and the way his mother had smiled at him, even though her eyes were sad. He'd heard her crying in the bathroom earlier, even though she'd turned on the fan to mask the sound. But he was 7 now, almost 8. He was getting good at knowing when his mother was pretending everything was okay. Tomorrow, he decided, he would draw her a picture. Not of a cake this time, but of her, his beautiful, tired, amazing mother who worked harder than anyone he knew. It wouldn't fix anything. He knew that. But maybe it would make her smile for real. That's what he wished for as he finally drifted off to sleep. Not a cake, not presents, not even a party. Just one real smile from his mom. One moment where she didn't have to pretend. Just one moment of peace. After crying alone in that stairwell, Amara had gone home to Caleb and held him a little tighter than usual. She'd thanked Mrs. Chen for watching him, apologized for Talia's absence, and tucked her son into bed with whispered promises that next year would be better. The next morning arrived too quickly, gray and cold, with Amara's alarm screaming at 5:30 like it did every Wednesday. She dressed in the dim light of her tiny bedroom, pulling on the navy blue polo shirt and black pants that marked her as part of prestige office cleaning services. Her grocery store shift didn't start until noon today, which meant she had a rare morning window to tackle the weekly deep clean at one of their premium accounts. The address on her assignment sheet read, Hale Enterprises, Downtown Financial District. Amara had cleaned that building twice before, always different floors, always during evening shifts when the place was nearly empty. She'd never paid much attention to the name on the contract. Corporate buildings all looked the same to her anyway, just glass and steel, and people who made more in a month than she did in a year. What made this morning different, what made her stomach twist with anxiety, was the text she'd received from Talia at 6 in the morning. Sorry, sis, can't watch Caleb today. Got called in for a shift. You understand, right? Amara had stared at that message for a full minute, her jaw clenched so tight it ached. Talia worked part-time at a hair salon, and her schedule changed constantly. But that wasn't the real issue. The real issue was that Talia had promised, actually promised this time, that she'd be reliable. That she'd help more with Caleb, so Amara could keep both jobs. There was no one else to call. Mrs. Chen had a doctor's appointment. The after-school program didn't open until 3. And Amara couldn't afford to miss this shift, not after losing hours last week when she'd stayed home with Caleb's fever. Which was why, at 7:15 on a cold Wednesday morning, Amara walked through the revolving doors of Hale Enterprises with her cleaning supplies in one hand and her 7-year-old son's hand in the other. Caleb's eyes went wide the moment they stepped into the lobby. The space was enormous, with marble floors that gleamed like ice and soaring ceilings crisscrossed with steel beams that caught the morning light. A massive fountain stood in the center, water cascading down geometric levels of black stone. But what really captured Caleb's attention were the walls, floor-to-ceiling digital displays showing rotating images of cities from around the world. Tokyo at night, Paris at sunset, New York in the rain. "Mommy," he whispered, his voice full of awe. "It's like a castle." Amara squeezed his hand gently. "Stay close to me, baby. Don't touch anything. And be very, very quiet. Can you do that?" Caleb nodded solemnly, clutching his small backpack that held his notebook, crayons, and a juice box. The security guard at the desk barely glanced at them as Amara signed in. She'd learned years ago that cleaning staff were essentially invisible in places like this. As long as you wore the uniform and didn't cause problems, people looked right through you. They took the elevator to the 14th floor, where Amara had been assigned to deep clean the executive conference rooms. The hallway was empty and quiet, with thick carpet that muffled their footsteps. Frosted glass doors lined both sides, each one etched with department names and titles that meant nothing to Amara. She set Caleb up in a small waiting area outside the main conference room, a spot with a leather couch and a glass coffee table that held neat stacks of business magazines. "You can draw here, okay? But stay in this exact spot. Don't wander off." "I promise, Mommy." Amara kissed the top of his head, then wheeled her cart into the conference room and got to work. The space was huge, dominated by a glossy black table that could seat 20 people. Windows overlooked the city, offering a view that probably cost more than Amara's entire yearly salary. She fell into the familiar rhythm of cleaning, wiping down surfaces, vacuuming, checking her work twice because this was a premium account, and mistakes weren't tolerated. Through the glass door, she could see Caleb sitting quietly on the couch, his head bent over his notebook as he drew. 40 minutes later, she was nearly finished when she heard voices in the hallway, male voices, professional and brisk. She quickly gathered her supplies, hoping to slip out before whoever it was arrived. But as she pushed her cart toward the door, it opened, and she found herself face to face with the last person she expected to see. Richard Hale stopped mid-step, his expression shifting from preoccupied to shocked in an instant. He wore a charcoal gray suit today, his briefcase in one hand, but those were the same kind eyes from the bakery. "You," he said, his voice colored with surprise. "You work here?" Amara felt heat flood her cheeks. Of all the buildings in this city, of all the floors, of all the moments. "I'm just finishing up," she said quickly, not meeting his eyes. "I'll be out of your way." "No, wait, I didn't mean it like that." Richard set his briefcase down, and Amara noticed 2 other men in suits behind him, both looking impatient. "I'm sorry, I was just surprised. I had no idea you worked for our cleaning service." One of the suited men cleared his throat. "Richard, we have the budget meeting in 10 minutes. Give me a second, Tom." Richard's attention stayed on Amara, and she wished desperately that the floor would open up and swallow her. Yesterday's humiliation in the bakery was bad enough. Now he was seeing her like this, in her cleaning uniform, in his building, confirming every assumption about the gap between their worlds. "I really need to go," Amara said, maneuvering her cart around him. That's when Richard noticed Caleb, who had appeared in the doorway, his notebook clutched to his chest. The little boy's eyes widened with recognition. "It's the cake man," he said softly. Richard's expression melted into something warmer. "Hey, buddy, what are you doing here?" Before Caleb could answer, another voice rang out from down the hall, young and excited. "Dad, Mrs. Patterson said you wanted to see me before my tutor gets here." Lily Hale came running around the corner, her blonde ponytail bouncing, dressed in a private school uniform with a backpack covered in sparkly butterfly patches. She skidded to a stop when she saw Caleb, and her face lit up with delight. "Oh, it's the birthday boy from the bakery." The 2 children stared at each other for a moment, and then Lily took a bold step forward. "Do you like to draw? I saw you have a notebook." Caleb glanced at his mother, who nodded slightly, then looked back at Lily. "Yeah, I draw buildings and stuff." "I draw too," Mostly horses and castles, but I'm trying to learn people. They're really hard. People are super hard. Caleb agreed seriously. I can't get the hands right. Richard watched the kids with an expression Amara couldn't quite read, something between surprise and tenderness. The suited men behind him were checking their watches, clearly annoyed, but Richard ignored them. Listen, he said, turning back to Amara. I know yesterday was awkward, and I don't want to make you uncomfortable, but would you like to sit down for a minute? I can have someone bring up some water or coffee if you'd like. No, thank you, Amara said firmly, though her throat was dry and she'd been on her feet since 6. I have other rooms to clean. Please, just for a minute. There was something in his voice, a gentle insistence that wasn't demanding but felt genuine. Amara hesitated, acutely aware of her supervisor's rules about fraternizing with clients, aware of the suited men watching this interaction with poorly concealed curiosity, aware that every second she stood here was a second that marked her as different, as other, as someone who didn't belong in this gleaming tower. But she was also aware of Caleb, who was showing Lily his notebook with an expression of pure joy that she hadn't seen since before his birthday. Just for a minute, she said quietly. Richard smiled, then turned to his colleagues. Tom, Jeff, start the meeting without me. I'll join you shortly. Richard, the board is already upset about Harper's move yesterday. We can't afford to lose focus right now. I said I'll join you shortly. The authority in his voice was unmistakable. The men exchanged glances but nodded and walked away. Once they were gone, Richard gestured to the waiting area where Caleb had been sitting. Please. Amara sat reluctantly on the edge of the leather couch, her hands folded in her lap. Caleb and Lily had already settled on the floor, their notebooks spread between them as they compared drawings. Richard pulled over a chair and sat across from Amara, his posture relaxed but his expression serious. I'm sorry if I embarrassed you just now, he said. That wasn't my intention. You didn't, Amara lied. I just need to keep working. I understand, but I'm glad I ran into you. I've been thinking about yesterday. Please don't. It's over. It's fine. Is it? The question hung in the air between them. Amara didn't answer because they both knew it wasn't fine. Not really. Not when she'd spent last night crying in a stairwell, and this morning dragging her son to work because she had no other choice. Richard leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. I want you to know that I wasn't trying to insult you or make you feel small. I just remembered what it was like when things were tight for my family. My wife, Catherine, she struggled with accepting help too. She had that same fierce pride. He paused, and Amara saw genuine emotion flicker across his face. She passed away 2 years ago. Cancer. I'm sorry, Amara said, meaning it. She glanced at Lily, who was laughing at something Caleb had drawn, and felt a pang of shared grief. That must be incredibly hard. It is. For both of us. Lily doesn't talk about it much, but I know she's lonely. She doesn't have many friends at her school. As if on cue, Lily's voice piped up. Caleb, can you teach me how to draw buildings? Yours are so good. Sure, you just start with squares and rectangles, and then you add windows. Watching them together, Amara felt something shift in her chest. 2 lonely kids from completely different worlds connecting over crayons and paper. Look, Richard said gently, drawing her attention back. I'm not trying to rescue you or play hero, but if you ever need anything, even just someone to talk to, I'm here. That's all I wanted to say. Before Amara could respond, a commotion erupted from down the hall. Raised voices, rapid footsteps. Richard stood immediately, his body language shifting to alert. A security guard appeared, speaking urgently into his radio. Sir, we have a situation. Someone unauthorized was spotted on the executive floor. We're doing a sweep now. Richard's jaw tightened. What floor? This one, sir. Amara instinctively reached for Caleb, but Richard held up a hand. Everyone stay calm. It's probably nothing. But his expression said otherwise. What none of them knew was that at that exact moment, several floors below, Dean Harper's hired operative was slipping a manila envelope into Richard's office drawer. Inside were forged documents, contracts with signatures that looked like Richard's but weren't, agreements for deals that would destroy everything Hale Enterprises had built if they went public. The trap was set. All it needed was the right moment to spring. But in the hallway outside the conference room, Caleb happened to glance out a window that overlooked an interior courtyard. His artist's eye, trained to notice details, caught movement. A man in a blue uniform, not the right shade of blue for building security, slipping out of a doorway marked "Executive Offices Only." The man was tall and thin, with a red baseball cap pulled low, and on his wrist, visible even from this distance, was a distinctive tattoo of a snake coiled around a skull. Caleb didn't understand what he was seeing, not really, but something about it felt wrong. The security guard's radio crackled. "All clear on 14. Subject must have moved to another floor." Richard relaxed slightly, but his expression remained troubled. He turned back to Amara. "I'm sorry about this. We've had some issues with corporate espionage lately. My competitor, Dean Harper, he's been trying to undermine us for months." Amara stood, taking Caleb's hand. "We should go. I've taken up too much of your time." "Wait." Richard pulled a business card from his pocket and held it out. "Please, just in case." Amara stared at the card like it might burn her, but something about the genuine concern in Richard's eyes made her take it. She slipped it into her pocket without looking at it. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for being kind, both yesterday and today. You don't have to thank me for basic human decency." Lily had stood too, looking disappointed. "Do you have to go? Caleb was just showing me how to draw the fountain." "Maybe another time, sweetheart," Richard said gently. Caleb and Lily waved goodbye, both of them looking like they'd just lost a friend. Amara wheeled her cart away quickly, her face burning, her emotions a tangled mess of gratitude and shame and something else she couldn't quite name. As they waited for the elevator, Caleb tugged her sleeve. "Mommy, I saw something weird." "What do you mean, baby?" "A man put something in one of the offices. He had a snake tattoo on his arm." Amara barely processed the words, her mind still spinning from the encounter with Richard. "That's nice, sweetheart. Don't worry about it." But Caleb's words would prove to be anything but nice. They would prove to be the key to everything. The rest of that day passed in a blur. Amara finished her cleaning shift, rushed to her grocery store job, and counted down the minutes until she could collapse at home. Caleb stayed with Mrs. Chen again, and when Amara picked him up that evening, the older woman mentioned that a strange man had been asking questions in the building earlier. "What kind of questions?" Amara asked, her stomach tightening. "About who lives here, what apartments have children." I told him nothing, of course. "But be careful, dear." That night, as Amara helped Caleb with his bath, she noticed he was unusually quiet. "You okay, baby?" "Mommy, that man I saw today, the one with the tattoo. I keep thinking about him. Something felt wrong." "Wrong how?" "Like he was doing something bad." Amara stroked his wet hair, trying to soothe away his worry. "Sometimes grown-ups have jobs we don't understand, that's all. Don't think about it anymore." But Caleb did think about it. That night, unable to sleep, he got up and drew what he'd seen. The man's profile, the distinctive tattoo, the way he'd been looking around nervously before slipping the file into the drawer. Caleb's 7-year-old hand captured more detail than anyone would have expected. The keen observation of a child who spent his life watching and translating the world into pictures. Meanwhile, Richard sat in his home office, staring at financial reports that should have had his full attention. But his mind kept drifting to the woman he'd run into that morning. Amara. He'd learned her last name from the sign-in sheet security had shown him. Amara Johnson, single mother, worked 2 jobs, too proud to accept help, even when she desperately needed it. He thought about how she'd looked in that conference room, uncomfortable but dignified, protecting her son even in her embarrassment. He thought about Lily's face when she'd connected with Caleb, the first real spark of joy he'd seen from his daughter in months. His phone buzzed with a text from his lead attorney. The Harper situation was escalating. There were rumors of documents, of evidence that could implicate Richard in unethical dealings. His board was panicking. Tomorrow there would be emergency meetings, damage control, potentially even legal action. But Richard's thoughts weren't on Harper. They were on a little boy who'd said something about a man putting something in an office. A small detail, probably nothing. Kids notice strange things all the time. Still, something nagged at him. He pulled up the security footage from that morning, scanning through hours of recordings. And there, at timestamp 9:47 a.m., he saw it. A man in a maintenance uniform that didn't quite match, slipping into Richard's office when it should have been locked. The time code placed it exactly when Caleb would have been in that hallway. Richard's blood ran cold. He zoomed in on the footage, enhancing the image. The man's face was mostly hidden by a cap, but visible on his wrist was a tattoo. Dark, distinctive, unmistakable. That little boy had witnessed something critical. And if Harper's people realized that, if they knew Caleb had seen them. Richard grabbed his phone and dialed security. "I need a team on standby. And get me everything we have on Amara Johnson from our cleaning service contract. Address, phone number, everything." "Sir, is something wrong?" "Potentially very wrong." As Richard made his calls, completely unaware that the danger was far worse than he imagined, Amara's old scooter sat in the building's parking area, its engine cold and dead. She'd tried to start it 3 times before giving up, exhaustion making her want to cry. The repair would cost money she didn't have. Tomorrow, she'd have to take the bus, which meant leaving even earlier, which meant less sleep, which meant another day of running on fumes. She trudged up the stairs to her apartment, each step feeling like climbing a mountain. When she reached her floor, she found a package at her door. No label, no return address. She carefully opened it and found a brand new sketchbook, expensive paper, professional quality. And tucked inside was a small note in neat handwriting. For Caleb. Every artist deserves good supplies. R.H. Amara's hands trembled as she held the notebook. Part of her wanted to return it, to maintain the wall she'd built between herself and Charity, but another part, the part that was so bone-tired she could barely think, wanted to cry at the simple kindness of it. She brought the notebook inside and set it on the kitchen counter, unsure what to do with it. Caleb was already asleep, curled up in his bed with his worn blanket. She stood in his doorway, watching him breathe. This perfect little human she'd created, this boy who deserved so much more than she could give him. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Richard Hale. I got your number from the cleaning service. I hope that's okay. I wanted to make sure you and Caleb got home safely." Amara stared at the message for a long moment. She should be angry about the boundary violation, about him getting her personal number without permission. But instead, she felt something else. Something that scared her because it felt dangerously like hope. She typed back slowly. "We're fine. Thank you for the notebook. You didn't have to do that." His response came quickly. "I wanted to. Caleb has real talent. Please let him keep it." Amara didn't respond. She turned her phone face down on the counter and went to take a shower, letting the hot water wash away the day's exhaustion and confusion. As steam filled the tiny bathroom, she tried not to think about kind eyes and expensive sketchbooks, and the feeling of being seen by someone who didn't look through her like she was invisible. She tried not to think about how dangerous it was to start hoping for things she couldn't have. But hope, she was learning, had a way of creeping in through the cracks, whether you wanted it to or not. In his penthouse across the city, Richard stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the lights of the city below. Lily was asleep in her room, her new drawing of her and Caleb taped to her wall. She'd talked about him all evening, asking when they could see him again, saying she'd finally found someone who understood about drawing. Richard had noticed something while looking at security footage, something that made his protective instincts flare. The man with the tattoo had paused near the waiting area where Caleb had been sitting, had looked directly at the spot, had seemed to notice the child before moving on. If Harper's operative had seen Caleb, if he remembered the boy's face, if he realized Caleb had been in a position to witness the crime. Richard pulled out his phone and sent another text to his head of security. I need protection on the Johnson family. Discreet surveillance, nothing that would frighten them. But I want to know if anyone suspicious goes near their building. Already on it, sir. Team is in position. Richard exhaled slowly. He was probably overreacting. Harper was ruthless in business, but surely wouldn't actually harm a child. Right? But Richard hadn't survived in the corporate world by being naive. He knew what desperation could drive people to do. And Harper was desperate, his company hemorrhaging money, his reputation on the line. As Richard finally headed to bed, his phone buzzed one more time. A message from his investigator. Found the documents in your drawer, exactly where the kid said they'd be. Forgeries, but damn good ones. If these had gone public, you'd be facing federal charges. That boy saved your entire company. Richard sat on the edge of his bed, the weight of it settling over him. A 7-year-old kid with a notebook and observant eyes had potentially saved everything Richard had built, everything he'd worked for, everything he was trying to preserve for his daughter. He owed Caleb. He owed Amara. And more than that, he wanted to protect them. Because in less than 24 hours, Richard Hale had gone from trying to give a child a birthday cake to feeling profoundly, personally responsible for keeping that child safe. 2 floors below Amara's apartment, a man in a dark jacket sat in a parked car, his phone pressed to his ear. He had a photo pulled up on his screen, a grainy image from building security showing a woman and a small boy entering Hale Enterprises that morning. Yeah, I found them, he said into the phone. The kid lives here. 3rd floor, apartment 3E. What do you want me to do? Dean Harper's voice came through cold and clear. Nothing yet. Just watch. If the kid becomes a problem, we'll handle it. But quietly. Very quietly. The man with the snake tattoo ended the call and lit a cigarette, settling in for a long night of surveillance. Above him, Caleb Johnson slept peacefully, dreaming of fountains and digital walls and a girl with a blonde ponytail who liked to draw horses. He had no idea that his simple act of noticing, of seeing what others missed, had put him directly in the crosshairs of a dangerous man. He had no idea that everything was about to change. But somewhere deep in his 7-year-old heart, in that place where intuition lives before logic learns to override it, Caleb knew something was wrong. And tomorrow, when he woke up, he would remember that feeling. He would remember the man with the snake tattoo. And he would try to tell his mother again. This time, she would have to listen after discovering the planted documents and realizing Caleb had witnessed the crime. Richard couldn't shake the gnawing worry that had settled in his chest. Thursday evening arrived with dark clouds rolling in, and Amara finished her grocery store shift exhausted and anxious. Her scooter was still broken, which meant taking 2 buses home, which meant getting back later than usual. As she and Caleb walked from the bus stop toward their apartment building, the streetlights flickered on one by one. The neighborhood wasn't dangerous exactly, but it wasn't safe either, especially after dark. Amara kept Caleb close, her hand tight around his. "Mommy, someone's following us," Caleb whispered suddenly. Amara's heart jumped. "What? No, baby, it's just people walking." "No, Mommy. Listen." She did listen, and beneath the usual city sounds, the traffic and distant sirens, she heard it. Footsteps, matching their pace. When she walked faster, they walked faster. When she slowed, they slowed. "Don't look back," Amara said quietly, pulling Caleb closer. "Just keep walking." Her building was still half a block away, and the security light near the entrance had been broken for weeks despite her complaints to the landlord. The hallway would be dark. If someone wanted to corner them there, no one would see. Amara's breath came faster. She clutched her keys between her fingers like a weapon, her other hand gripping Caleb's so tight it must have hurt, but he didn't complain. He could feel her fear. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Then, like something out of a dream, a black SUV pulled up to the curb beside them, smooth and silent. The passenger window rolled down, and a woman in a professional suit leaned out. "Mrs. Johnson, my name is Sarah Chen. Mr. Hale asked me to make sure you got home safely." Amara stopped, confused and relieved and suspicious all at once. "What? I don't understand." Mr. Hale was concerned about the security situation at his building today. He wanted to ensure you felt safe. "May I escort you inside?" Amara glanced back. The footsteps had stopped. Whoever had been following them had melted into the shadows between buildings, but she could still feel eyes watching. "Please," Sarah said gently. "Just let me walk you to your door." Something about the woman's calm professionalism, the genuine concern in her voice, broke through Amara's pride. She nodded, and Sarah stepped out of the SUV, speaking quietly into a radio as she did. Within seconds, a man emerged from the driver's side, his eyes scanning the street with practiced alertness. They walked to the building together, Sarah staying close to Amara, while the driver kept a few paces behind, watching their surroundings. When they reached the entrance, Amara saw immediately why the security light was out. The bulb hadn't just burned out, it had been deliberately broken. Glass crunched under her feet. "When did this happen?" Sarah asked, her voice sharp. "I'm not sure. It was working this morning." Sarah pulled out her phone and took photos of the broken light, the dark hallway, the building's exterior. Then she took more photos of the building's side door, which was propped open with a brick. "This is a serious security issue." They climbed the stairs to the third floor, and when they reached apartment 3E, Amara's hand shook as she tried to fit her key in the lock. The door finally opened, and she nearly cried when she saw what greeted her. Water. Everywhere. The ceiling leak that had been temporarily fixed last week had given way completely. Water dripped steadily from a gaping hole in the ceiling, pooling on the floor, soaking the cheap carpet, spreading toward Caleb's bedroom. "Oh no," Amara whispered. "No, no, no." Caleb ran to his room and came back with his new sketchbook, clutching it to his chest. "Mommy, my bed is wet, and my other drawings got ruined." Sarah was already on her phone. "Mr. Hale, we have a situation." "I don't need his help," Amara said automatically, but her voice cracked. She couldn't live here tonight. Not with water literally raining from the ceiling. Not with Caleb's bed soaked through. Not with mold that would make her son sick. Sarah held up a hand, listening to Richard on the phone, then turned to Amara. "Mr. Hale is on his way. He wants to help. He can't just show up here. This isn't his problem. With respect, Mrs. Johnson, someone followed you home tonight. Someone broke your building's security measures, and now you have a ceiling collapse. These aren't coincidences." Before Amara could respond, they heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. Her landlord, Mr. Patterson, appeared in the doorway, red-faced and annoyed. "What's all this noise about? Some people are trying to sleep." "The ceiling collapsed," Amara said, gesturing to the water. "You said you fixed it. I put a patch on it. Not my fault it didn't hold. I'll get someone out here next week." "Next week? We can't stay here tonight. Everything's soaked." Patterson shrugged. "Not my problem. You're already late on rent. Maybe this is a sign you should find somewhere else to live." Sarah stepped forward, her voice cold and professional. "This building has multiple code violations. That broken security light, the propped door, hazardous water damage. Should I call the city inspector right now, or would you prefer to handle this reasonably?" Patterson's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" "Someone who knows the law, and you're about to violate tenant habitability rights if you don't provide alternative accommodations immediately. I don't have to listen to this." Patterson turned to leave, but froze when he came face to face with Richard Hale, who had just reached the landing. Even in casual clothes, jeans, and a sweater, Richard carried an unmistakable presence of authority. "Mr. Patterson, I presume," Richard said calmly. I'm Richard Hale. I believe we need to have a conversation about building safety and tenant rights. Patterson's face went from red to pale. Richard Hale? As in Hale Enterprises. The same, and I'm very concerned about what I'm seeing here. Richard's eyes swept over the broken light switch on the wall, the water-stained ceiling, the general state of disrepair. These are serious safety violations, especially for a building with children. Look, I don't know who you think you are, but this is my property, and it's their home, Richard said, his voice dropping to something harder. A home you've allowed to become uninhabitable. Now you're going to leave Mrs. Johnson alone tonight. Tomorrow you'll have a licensed contractor here to fix this properly, and you'll waive any late fees or penalties. Do we understand each other? Patterson looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Richard's expression made him back down. Fine, whatever, but I want her out by the end of the month. That won't be necessary, Richard said. We'll work something out. Patterson left, muttering under his breath. Once he was gone, Richard turned to Amara, and she saw genuine worry in his eyes. Are you okay? Is Caleb okay? We're fine, Amara said automatically, even though they clearly weren't. Richard looked at the water damage, at Caleb clutching his sketchbook like a lifeline, at Amara's exhausted face, and made a decision. I have a guest suite in my building. It's just sitting empty. Please let me help you. Just for tonight, until we can figure out something better. I can't accept that. Amara. He said her name gently, and it was the first time he'd used it. Someone followed you home. Your building's security has been compromised, and now you have no safe place to sleep. Please let me help. Not because I think you need rescuing, but because it's the right thing to do. Caleb tugged his mother's hand. Mommy, I'm scared. Can we go with him, please? Looking at her son's frightened face, at the water still dripping from the ceiling, Amara felt her resistance crumble. For once, she was too tired to fight. Just for tonight, she whispered. Just for tonight. Richard agreed, though they both somehow knew it would be more than that. An hour later, Amara and Caleb stood in a guest suite that was bigger than their entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city lights. The furniture was sleek and modern. The bathroom had heated floors and a tub big enough to swim in. It was the kind of place Amara had only seen in magazines. This is too much, she said quietly. It's just a room, Richard replied. A room that's been empty since my mother-in-law last visited. Please make yourselves comfortable. Lily appeared in the doorway, her face lighting up when she saw Caleb. You're staying here. That's so cool. Can we draw together tomorrow? Lily, it's past your bedtime, Richard said gently. But Dad, Caleb's here. Tomorrow, sweetheart, I promise. After Lily reluctantly went to bed, Richard ordered food for Amara and Caleb, who'd barely eaten all day. While they ate, he made phone calls, arranging for a team to clean up the apartment, for contractors to assess the damage, for legal counsel to review Amara's lease. Watching him work, Amara felt overwhelmed. Why are you doing all this? Richard looked up from his phone. Because you and Caleb have become important to me, and because that boy saved my entire company. What do you mean? Richard explained everything. The planted documents, the security footage, how Caleb's observation had led them to discover Harper's scheme before it was too late. He has an incredible eye for detail. That drawing he made, the one with the man and the tattoo, it matched our suspect perfectly. Amara looked at Caleb, who had fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted from fear and stress. He mentioned seeing something. I didn't think it was important. It was critically important. And now Harper's people know Caleb saw them. That's why you were followed tonight. The words hit Amara like ice water. What? I'm having my security team investigate. But in the meantime, I need you and Caleb to stay safe. Will you let me help with that? For the first time, Amara didn't argue. She just nodded, too overwhelmed to do anything else. That night, after Caleb was tucked into the guest room's massive bed, Amara stood at the window, looking out at the city. She felt like she'd stepped into someone else's life. Someone who lived in places like this, who had people to call when things went wrong, who didn't have to carry everything alone. Richard appeared beside her, holding 2 mugs. Hot chocolate. My wife's recipe. She used to make it when things felt overwhelming. Amara took the mug, her hands wrapping around its warmth. They stood in silence for a moment, just 2 people who'd been broken by life in different ways, finding unexpected comfort in each other's presence. "Thank you," Amara finally said, "for everything. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't have to repay kindness," Richard said quietly. "You just have to accept it." The next morning brought unexpected peace. Caleb woke up in a bed that didn't smell like mold, in a room with windows that actually opened, in a place where he felt safe. When Lily knocked on the door with her box of art supplies, his face transformed with joy. Amara woke to find a basket at the door. Inside were fresh clothes in her size, toiletries, medicine for Caleb's persistent cough that she'd been stretching to make last. No note, no signature. But she knew. Always Richard, quietly taking care of details she didn't even know she needed. At Hale Enterprises that morning, Richard reviewed footage his security team had retrieved from the surrounding area. The man who'd followed Amara was clearly visible in several frames. The tattoo on his wrist matched Caleb's drawing exactly. "His name is Marcus Webb," Richard's investigator said. "Known associate of Dean Harper, has a record for intimidation and corporate espionage. Do we have enough to bring charges?" "With the documents we found in the security footage, yes. But Webb is just hired muscle. Harper's the one pulling the strings." Richard studied the screen, watching Webb lurk near Amara's building. Rage built in his chest, cold and focused. Harper had crossed a line. Threatening Richard's business was one thing, but threatening a child and his mother was something else entirely. Meanwhile, Caleb sat in the guest suite's living room with Lily, both children absorbed in their drawing. Caleb had started a new picture in his expensive sketchbook, this one showing the building where his mother worked, with its fountains and digital walls and impossible beauty. "Is it scary being followed?" Lily asked quietly. Caleb thought about it. "Yeah, but my mom is really brave. She always keeps me safe. My dad is brave too. After my mom died, he was really sad for a long time, but he takes care of me no matter what." The 2 children shared a look of understanding, that particular bond that forms between kids who've learned too young that the world isn't always safe or fair. At the grocery store, Amara worked her shift in a daze. Her supervisor noticed immediately. "Johnson, you look terrible. Everything okay?" "Just had a rough night. I'm fine." But she wasn't fine. Her mind kept spinning through everything that had happened. The fear of being followed, the destruction of their apartment, the overwhelming kindness from a man she barely knew. And underneath it all, a growing realization that scared her more than any stalker. She was starting to depend on Richard, starting to imagine what it might feel like to not carry everything alone, starting to let herself hope for things that seemed impossible for someone like her. When her shift ended, she found a text from Richard. "Security picked up suspicious activity near your building again. Please stay at the suite tonight. For Caleb's sake, if not your own." Amara stared at the message, and instead of her usual prideful refusal, she simply wrote back, "Okay." That evening, as the 4 of them sat together for dinner, Lily insisted on showing everyone her improved building drawing skills. "See? Caleb taught me about perspective." Richard watched his daughter's animation, the life in her eyes that had been missing for so long. He glanced at Amara, who was helping Caleb cut his chicken, and felt something shift in his chest. This makeshift family dinner felt right in a way nothing had since Catherine died. After the kids went to bed, Richard and Amara sat in the living room. He poured wine for both of them, though Amara barely touched hers. "Can I ask you something?" Richard said. "Of course." "Caleb's father, is he in the picture at all?" Amara's expression hardened. No. He left when I was 4 months pregnant, said he wasn't ready to be a father. I haven't heard from him since. I'm sorry. That must have been incredibly difficult. It was. But it also made me stronger. I learned I could do it alone. Didn't need someone who didn't want to be there. You shouldn't have to do it alone, though. Everyone needs help sometimes. Amara looked at him, really looked at him, seeing past the expensive clothes and the penthouse and the success. She saw a widower raising a daughter alone, saw someone who understood loneliness and fear and the weight of being everything for a child. You get it, she said softly. You actually understand. I do. And I want you to know, Amara, you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. The way you protect Caleb, the way you work so hard, the way you maintain your dignity no matter what. That takes incredible strength. Something warm bloomed in Amara's chest, something dangerous and beautiful and terrifying. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing me, for treating us like we matter. You've always mattered, Richard said, echoing words from before, and this time Amara believed him. That night, as Amara lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her phone buzzed. It was a call from an unknown number, and against her better judgment, she answered. Hello? Heavy breathing. Then a voice, low and menacing. Keep the boy quiet. Last warning. The line went dead. Amara sat bolt upright, her heart hammering. She ran to Caleb's room and found him sleeping peacefully, unaware of the threat. Then, without thinking, without pride or hesitation, she went to Richard's office where light still showed under the door. She knocked softly. He opened immediately, saw her face and knew. What happened? Someone just called me. Her voice shook. They said to keep Caleb quiet. They threatened us. Richard's expression went cold and hard. Show me the number. She handed him her phone with trembling hands. Richard immediately forwarded it to his security team, then pulled out his own phone and made a call. Sarah, I need a full security detail on the suite, now, and trace this number immediately. He turned back to Amara, his voice gentle despite the fury in his eyes. You're safe here. I promise you, I will not let anyone hurt you or Caleb. This is because of what he saw, isn't it? Because he witnessed that man planting evidence. Yes. Harper's getting desperate, but we have enough evidence now to bury him. The police are already investigating. Amara sank into a chair, the weight of everything finally too much. I don't know how this became my life. A week ago, my biggest worry was affording a birthday cake. Now someone's threatening my son because he noticed the wrong thing at the wrong time. Richard knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. I need you to hear me. This isn't your fault, and I'm going to fix this. Harper will pay for what he's done, but right now, I need you to stay here where it's safe. Can you do that? Amara looked into his eyes and saw genuine care there, maybe even something deeper. She saw a man who'd gone from stranger to protector in less than a week, who'd broken through every wall she'd built, who made her feel something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. I need your help, she said, the words she'd sworn she'd never say. Please help us. Always, Richard said, squeezing her hands gently. I'll always help you. And for the first time since Caleb's father walked away 7 years ago, Amara Johnson let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to face the world alone. Maybe kindness wasn't a trap. Maybe accepting help wasn't weakness. Maybe, in the most unexpected way, she'd found someone who truly saw her worth. As Richard held her hands in that quiet moment, both of them knew everything had changed. They'd become something more than strangers, more than helper and helped. They'd become people who mattered to each other, and that realization would change everything. After the threatening phone call, Amara barely slept. She'd finally accepted Richard's help, and now everything felt like it was spinning faster than she could process. Richard arrived with his security team within minutes. tall men and women in dark suits who swept through the penthouse checking locks and windows while speaking in low, urgent tones into their radios. Richard had moved Amara and Caleb to the main guest suite on his floor, closer to where he and Lily slept. He wanted them within reach, wanted to know they were safe. As dawn broke over the city on Friday morning, Richard sat in his home office reviewing everything his investigator had compiled on Dean Harper. The evidence was damning. Security footage showing Marcus Webb entering Hale Enterprises, the forged documents matching Harper's known patterns of fraud, financial records showing payments from Harper's shell companies to Webb, and most importantly, Caleb's drawing, a child's honest observation that perfectly captured Webb's distinctive snake tattoo. Richard's attorney arrived at 7, coffee in hand and concern on his face. "This is solid, Richard. With Caleb's testimony about what he witnessed, we can prove the documents were planted. But are you sure you want to put a 7-year-old through that kind of questioning?" "I don't want to," Richard said firmly. "But Harper made this personal when he threatened them. I won't let him walk away from this." In the guest suite, Caleb woke to find Lily already at his bedside, holding her box of colored pencils. "Want to draw before breakfast?" she whispered, trying not to wake Amara. But Amara was already awake, had been for hours, staring at the ceiling and thinking about that voice on the phone. Keep the boy quiet. When she heard the children whispering, she got up and found them sitting cross-legged on the floor, papers spread between them. "Morning, Mommy," Caleb said brightly. Lily brought her good pencils. Amara managed a smile, though her stomach was twisted with worry. "That's wonderful, baby. What are you drawing?" "The man I saw," Caleb said simply, his small hand moving across the paper with surprising precision. "The one with the snake. Mr. Hale said it was important." Amara watched as her son recreated the scene from memory, the details sharp and clear. The way Webb had looked around before entering the office, the angle of his arm showing the tattoo, even the specific pattern of the snake coiled around the skull. It was remarkable work for a child, and it made Amara's heart ache with both pride and fear. "Caleb's really good at remembering faces," Lily said admiringly. "I can never get faces right." "That's because you focus on the whole picture," Caleb explained seriously. "You have to look at the parts first. Like, see how the eyes are closer together, and the nose is kind of crooked." As the children talked art technique, Amara stepped into the hallway and nearly collided with Richard, who was carrying a tray of breakfast. "I thought you might be hungry," he said. "Richard, we need to talk about this, about Caleb being involved. I don't want him scared or traumatized." "I know. Come with me." They walked to his office, where Richard showed her everything his team had compiled. The scope of Harper's scheme, the danger they'd been in, the fact that Caleb's observation had quite literally saved Richard's entire company from collapse. "Harper's desperate now," Richard explained. "My attorneys are meeting with the police this morning. They'll want to talk to Caleb, but I've arranged for a child psychologist to be present, someone who specializes in making kids feel safe during interviews. And if Harper tries something before then, he won't get the chance. I have 6 security personnel on this floor alone. Sarah's team is monitoring every entrance to the building, and I've requested police protection as well." Amara sank into a chair, overwhelmed. "This is insane. A week ago I was just trying to afford a birthday cake." Richard knelt beside her chair, just as he had the night before. "I know this is a lot, but it's almost over. Harper's attorney called this morning trying to negotiate. He knows we have him." "What does that mean?" "It means he's panicking, and panicked men make mistakes." Richard's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his expression darkened. "Speaking of mistakes, Harper just tried to bribe someone on my board. He's offering insider information in exchange for them burying the evidence against him. Will they take it? Not a chance. I pick my board members carefully." Richard stood, his jaw set with determination. "This ends today, one way or another." 2 hours later, Richard sat in a conference room at Hale Enterprises, surrounded by his attorneys, his investigator, 2 police detectives, and the child psychologist he'd hired. Amara sat beside Caleb, holding his hand as the adults explained what they needed from him. The psychologist, Dr. Sarah Williams, had a gentle voice and kind eyes. She knelt to Caleb's level and spoke to him like he mattered, not like he was just a witness. "Caleb, I understand you saw something unusual last week. Can you tell me about it?" Caleb glanced at his mother, who nodded encouragingly. "I saw a man go into an office when no one was looking. He put something in a drawer and then left really fast." "Can you describe this man?" Caleb pulled out his sketchbook and showed them his drawing. "He looked like this. He had a snake tattoo right here." Caleb pointed to his own wrist. "And he was wearing a blue uniform, but it wasn't the right blue for the building." One of the detectives leaned forward. "You're very observant, Caleb. Did the man see you?" "I don't think so. I was drawing by the window, but later when we were leaving, I saw him again in the parking area. He was watching people." The detective exchanged glances with his partner. "Would you recognize this man if you saw him again?" Caleb nodded seriously. "Yes, sir. I remember faces." Richard watched the interview with a mixture of pride and protectiveness. Caleb handled the questions with remarkable composure, his answers clear and consistent. Amara's hand never left her son's shoulder, her presence a steady anchor. When the interview concluded, Dr. Williams smiled at Caleb. "You did an excellent job. You're very brave." "Thank you. Can I go draw with Lily now?" The adults couldn't help but smile. Even in the middle of a criminal investigation, Caleb was still just a 7-year-old who wanted to play with his friend. As Richard walked Amara and Caleb back to the guest suite, his phone rang. His expression shifted as he listened, and when he hung up, there was grim satisfaction in his eyes. "Harper's attorney just called. They want to meet. This afternoon." "Is that good?" "It means he knows he's finished. He's going to try to cut a deal." "What kind of deal?" "The kind where he avoids federal prison if he's lucky." Richard's voice was cold. "But after what he did, after threatening you and Caleb, I'm not feeling particularly merciful." The confrontation happened in Hale Enterprises' main boardroom at 3 o'clock. Dean Harper arrived with his attorney, both men looking haggard and defeated. Harper was in his late 40s with silver hair and the kind of practiced charm that had made him successful in business. But today, that charm was nowhere to be found. Richard sat at the head of the table, flanked by his legal team and the 2 detectives. Harper's attorney started with pleasantries, trying to establish a cooperative tone, but Richard cut him off. "Let's skip the performance. You're here because you know we have enough evidence to destroy you. The forged documents, the security footage, witness testimony, financial records connecting you to Marcus Webb. The only question is whether you cooperate now or wait for the federal charges." Harper's face reddened. "You can't prove I knew what Webb was doing." Richard slid a folder across the table. "Actually, we can. Your sister Talia was quite helpful." Amara, watching from an observation room via video feed, gasped. "Talia? What does she have to do with this?" Sarah Chen, standing beside her, explained quietly. "We discovered Harper approached her 3 days ago, offered her $5,000 to say you coached Caleb to lie about what he saw. She initially agreed, but then recorded the conversation and brought it to us this morning." Amara's hands trembled. Her unreliable, frustrating sister had actually done something right, had actually protected them when it mattered most. On the screen, Harper's attorney was reviewing the recording transcript, his expression growing more grim with each line. Harper himself looked like he might be sick. "This is entrapment," Harper tried weakly. "This is justice," Richard countered. "You planted evidence in my company. You hired someone to intimidate a single mother and her child. You attempted to bribe multiple people to participate in fraud. And all because you couldn't compete fairly in the marketplace." One of the detectives leaned forward. "Mr. Harper, we also have Marcus Webb in custody. He's been very cooperative about who hired him and why." Harper's remaining defenses crumbled. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time he looked genuinely afraid. "What do you want?" "I want you gone," Richard said coldly. "I want you to sign over your company's assets to repay the damages you've caused. I want a full confession. And I want you to stay away from Amara Johnson and her son for the rest of your life. If I hear you've so much as looked in their direction, I will dedicate every resource I have to making sure you spend the rest of your life in a federal prison. Do we understand each other?" Harper looked at his attorney, who nodded grimly. There was no other choice. "I understand," Harper whispered. As Harper signed confession after confession, his empire crumbling with each stroke of the pen, Richard felt no triumph. Only relief that it was over, that Amara and Caleb were safe. That justice had actually prevailed for once. When he returned to the observation room, Amara was crying. Not tears of sadness, but overwhelming relief. "Is it really over?" "It's really over. Harper will face charges, Webb is in custody, and you and Caleb are safe." Amara covered her face with her hands, her whole body shaking. Richard pulled her into his arms and she let herself finally break down after days of holding everything together. "Thank you," she sobbed into his shoulder. "Thank you for protecting us, for believing us, for caring." "Always," Richard murmured. "I'll always care." The next day, Saturday, brought sunshine and something that felt almost like peace. Amara woke to find another basket at her door, but this time the note was different. "Today is about celebration. No work, no worry, just family. Please join us in the garden at 2. When Amara opened Caleb's bedroom door to wake him, she found him already dressed, practically vibrating with excitement. "Mommy, Lily said there's a surprise today." "For me?" "Did she now?" Amara smiled, her heart feeling lighter than it had in years. "Well, I guess we better not keep them waiting." At 2 o'clock, Richard led them to his building's private rooftop garden, a space Amara hadn't known existed. When the elevator doors opened, she gasped. The entire garden had been transformed. Blue lights were strung between the trees, casting everything in a soft, magical glow. Tables were covered in white cloths with blue runners. Balloons in every shade of blue floated from weighted centerpieces, and everywhere, taped to trees and fences and posts, were drawings. Caleb's drawings, the ones that had been ruined in the apartment flooding, professionally restored and framed. But what made Caleb stop in his tracks, what made his eyes fill with tears, was the table in the center of it all. On it sat the Galaxy Dream Cake, exactly like the one from the bakery, with blue buttercream swirls and silver stars and yellow candles shaped like little rockets. "Happy birthday, buddy," Richard said softly, kneeling beside Caleb. "I know we're a few days late, but I wanted to make sure you had a real celebration." Caleb threw his arms around Richard's neck, hugging him with all the strength in his small body. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Lily appeared beside them, holding out a wrapped present. "This is from me and Dad. Well, mostly Dad, but I picked the paper." Caleb carefully unwrapped it to find a professional art set, the kind with dozens of pencils and paints and brushes that Amara could never have afforded. His mouth fell open. "This is the best present ever." "There's more," Lily said excitedly, pointing to another table laden with gifts. "We might have gone a little overboard." Amara felt tears streaming down her face, not tears of shame or embarrassment this time, but pure gratitude. Richard appeared beside her, his expression gentle. "I hope this is okay. I wanted Caleb to have the birthday he deserved." "It's more than okay," Amara managed. "It's perfect." The afternoon unfolded like something from a dream. They sang Happy Birthday while Caleb beamed, his face glowing in the candlelight. They ate cake and laughed and watched the kids run around the garden playing tag. Talia even showed up sober and genuine, apologizing to Amara for years of unreliability and promising to do better. "I almost helped that terrible man," Talia said, her voice thick with shame. Almost sold you out for money. But when I heard him talk about scaring Caleb, about threatening you, I couldn't do it. You're my sister. You and Caleb are my family." Amara hugged her sister tight. "You did the right thing when it mattered. That's what counts." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Richard pulled Amara aside. They stood at the garden's edge, looking out over the city that had brought them together in the most unexpected way. "I have something for you," Richard said, pulling out a folder. "It's not a gift exactly. It's an opportunity." Inside was a job offer, official and detailed. A position at Hale Enterprises as a facilities coordinator, with benefits. A salary that made Amara's breath catch, and flexible hours so she could be present in Caleb's life. "This isn't charity," Richard said firmly before she could protest. "You're one of the hardest working people I've met. You notice things others miss. You care about quality, and you understand this building better than most of my staff. I need someone like you on my team." Amara stared at the papers, her vision blurring with tears. "Richard, I don't know what to say." "Say yes. Say you'll let yourself have something good for once. Say you'll stop carrying everything alone." She looked up at him, this man who'd seen her at her lowest and somehow found her worth celebrating. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." Richard smiled, and in his eyes, Amara saw something that made her heart skip. Not pity, not charity, but genuine affection, maybe even the beginning of something more. Across the garden, Caleb and Lily sat side by side, watching the sunset and drawing in their notebooks. "This is the best birthday ever," Caleb said contentedly. "I'm glad you're staying here," Lily said. "It's nice having someone to draw with. It's nice not being alone." "Yeah," Caleb agreed. "My mom seems happier too. She smiles more now. My dad too. He laughs again, like he used to before my mom died." The two children shared a look of understanding that went beyond words. They'd both known loss and loneliness and fear. But now somehow, they'd found something that felt like family. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Richard called everyone together. "Before we end this perfect day, I want to say something." He looked at Caleb, at Amara, at the makeshift family they'd become. "A week ago, I saw a little boy who needed a birthday cake. I had no idea that trying to help would change my life, would remind me what it means to care about people, to protect them, to be part of something bigger than business and money and success." He turned to Caleb specifically. "You saved my company, buddy. But more than that, you saved me. You and your mom reminded me what really matters: family, kindness, being there for people when they need you most." Caleb walked over and took Richard's hand, then reached for his mother's hand with his other one. Lily joined them, and then Talia. And for a moment, they all stood together in a circle, connected by circumstance and choice, and something that felt a lot like love. "Make a wish," Amara told her son, nodding toward the cake with its flickering candles. Caleb closed his eyes tight, and when he opened them, he was smiling. "I don't need to wish for anything, Mommy. Everything I wanted already came true." Amara knelt and pulled him into her arms, breathing in the scent of his hair, feeling his heartbeat against her chest. Her son, her brave, observant, beautiful son who'd somehow led them to this impossible moment. "I love you, baby," she whispered. "I love you too, Mommy. And I'm not scared anymore." Neither was she, Amara realized. For the first time in 7 years, she wasn't scared of tomorrow, wasn't terrified of the next emergency, wasn't convinced that everything good would inevitably fall apart. She had a job that would let her breathe. She had a place to live while they figured out the next steps. She had her sister trying to be better. And she had Richard looking at her with eyes that promised safety and maybe eventually something more. As the party wound down and the kids grew sleepy, Richard walked Amara back to the guest suite. At the door, she turned to him, searching for words big enough to express what she felt. "You didn't just save us," she said softly. "You saw us. You treated us like we mattered, like we deserved dignity and kindness and help. No one's done that for me in a long time. You've always mattered, Amara, Richard said, echoing the words he'd spoken before. But this time they carried even more weight. From the first moment I saw you in that bakery, trying so hard to be strong for your son, you mattered to me. Their eyes met, and in that moment, both of them felt it. The connection that had grown from kindness into friendship, into something neither was quite ready to name, but both felt stirring in their hearts. Thank you, Amara said, for everything. For the job, for the party, for protecting us, for caring. Thank you for being exactly who you are. Thank you for letting me help, for trusting me, for giving Lily a friend and giving me a reason to remember what goodness looks like. Inside the suite, Caleb had already fallen asleep on the couch, his new art set clutched to his chest, a smile on his peaceful face. Amara covered him with a blanket and stood watching him breathe, this miracle child who'd somehow led them through darkness into light. Richard stood in the doorway, his own heart full as he watched this woman he'd come to care about so deeply tend to her son with such fierce, protective love. "Good night, Amara," he said softly. "Good night, Richard." As he walked back to his own rooms, where Lily slept dreaming of her new friend, Richard felt something he hadn't felt in 2 long years since Catherine's death. Hope. Hope that maybe healing was possible. Hope that maybe his daughter wouldn't be lonely anymore. Hope that maybe, just maybe, his life could hold joy again. And across the hall, Amara lay awake in the darkness, her hand resting over her heart, feeling it beat strong and steady and unafraid. She'd started this week trying to buy a birthday cake and ended it with so much more. A job, safety, friendship, the beginning of trust after years of having to handle everything alone. She thought about Richard's kindness, about the way he looked at her, about how for the first time in forever she felt like someone saw not just her struggles, but her strength, her worth, her value as a person beyond what she could do or provide or sacrifice. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. They'd have to figure out housing, navigate the complexities of their new relationship, help the kids adjust to all these changes. But tonight, for this one perfect moment, everything felt possible. Amara Johnson, who'd spent 7 years surviving, finally allowed herself to believe she might actually get to live. And that belief, that tiny seed of hope planted by an unexpected act of kindness in a neighborhood bakery, would grow into something beautiful, something that looked a lot like a second chance, something that felt exactly like home. When someone sees you at your lowest moment and still treats you like you matter, does that change who you become, or does it simply reveal who you always were? If this story touched your heart, like and subscribe for more stories about unexpected kindness and second chances.